Hello everybody and welcome to the second part of my in-depth comparison between the Sony a7 IV and the Canon R6. This episode is all about the video capabilities. If you are more interested in photography, the first part is already available. You'll find the link in the description below. Okay, let's get started. Here we have the two cameras, a7 IV and R6, and you can read the firmware versions I'd installed for each when I compared them. They were the latest available at the time of making this video. I'm not going to repeat a lot here, most of the information is available in part 1 of my review. I'm just going to mention the most important things for video makers. To switch from stills to video mode on the a7 IV, you move this secondary dial here, and this means you can use the main dial on top to select an exposure mode like manual or shutter speed priority. On the R6, once you have selected video with the main dial, you need to choose the exposure mode in the menu or quick menu. Concerning the customization, both cameras can separate basic settings such as exposure and autofocus between still and video. You can also configure the function buttons independently for the two modes. The a7 IV also allows you to do the same with the function menu. Both menu systems change accordingly if you are working in photo or video mode. At the rear, we find a multi-angle 3-inch LCD. The R6 monitor has more resolution than the Sony. They are both touch sensitive and you can do various things like navigating the menu. On the R6, you can also access the quick menu or start video recording by touching the monitor. Unfortunately, cables connected to both cameras can get in the way of the LCD mechanism when it is fully open on the side and you want to rotate the screen up or down. They also block part of the view when the screen is flipped 180 degrees. Now let's talk about memory cards. The R6 uses two UHS 2 SD cards just like the a7 IV, but the Sony is also compatible with the CF Express Type A card on the first slot. The CF Express card is required for video when you want to record 4K 60p at the maximum quality with the S&Q mode. Otherwise, a fast UHS 2 SD card should be enough. Both cameras have a 3.5mm microphone input and headphone output, as well as an HDMI port. That of the Sony is full size, whereas the Canon uses the smaller micro Type D connection. The a7 IV can also work with digital audio via its multifunction shoe. You can record 24-bit audio up to 4 channels with compatible microphones. Finally, battery life is similar with these two cameras. In my test, the R6 recorded a total of 113 minutes in 4K at 25p before the battery ran out. The a7 IV managed 2 extra minutes. Both cameras can record 4K up to 60 frames per second, but the a7 IV has to crop the sensor by 1.5 times in order to do so, whereas the Canon performs a smaller crop of 1.07 at all frame rates in 4K. Up to 30p, the Sony uses the entire width of the sensor. In Full HD, they can both record up to 120 frames per second. The Canon is limited to 7 minutes per clip, and this setting is only available with the high frame rate mode. This means that you get the slow motion effect in camera, but there is no sound. The a7 IV offers you both options, normal mode with audio or S&Q mode, which stands for slow and quick motion. In 4K, both cameras record by oversampling, meaning that they use all the pixels available and then they downscale the image to 4K, giving you the best image quality possible. The a7 IV has a 33 megapixel sensor as opposed to 20 megapixel on the R6, so it uses a considerable higher amount of pixels to create the video. This could lead us to think it delivers better sharpness, but in my test I found the results to be very similar. In fact, the R6 might appear a bit sharper at first because its profile has more contrast. As I said in my a7 III vs a7 IV full comparison, I think, but I could be wrong, that the Sony decreases the sharpness a little with the image processor, perhaps to avoid excessive noise. You can increase sharpness on the picture profiles of both cameras. I wouldn't go past 6 on the R6, whereas the a7 IV looks fine even with the highest setting. The results are the same in 4K with the APC mode. In Full HD and full frame mode, however, the R6 is a bit sharper. Both cameras offer 10-bit 422 internal recording. In the case of the R6, this is available only when selecting the Canon log or the HDR PQ setting, and it works with the H.265 codec. The A7 IV can record with a maximum bitrate of 600 megabit per second when the XFVC SI codec is selected. The R6 reaches 340 megabit per second when recording 10-bit or 230 megabit per second in 8-bit. The difference in color rendering I highlighted in the first part of my review is even more evident when recording video. The R6 consistently generates an image with more reds, which becomes too extreme with the portrait style if you leave it to the default settings. I much prefer the Canon neutral profile when it comes to skin tones. Keep in mind that just like for stills, the look and style profiles on each camera can be customized. For example, the color tone parameter on the R6 allows you to reduce the reddish skin tone. The A7 IV has a second set of profiles called, well, picture profiles. They include more advanced parameters that you also find in Sony's cinema cameras. It is also the place where you can select log and HLG curves as well as Cinetone. The R6 has HDR PQ, another HDR standard similar to HLG, and two Canon log settings, C-Log and C-Log 3. The minimum native ISO is 800 for the two Sony log curves, whereas C-Log starts from ISO 400 and C-Log 3 from ISO 800 on the R6. In both cases, you can set a lower ISO value, but it is an extended value, which means that dynamic range decreases as a result. The A7 IV has better dynamic range, particularly in the highlights where it saves more information than the R6. This is valid when using the HDR or log profiles. Additionally, S-Log 3 on the Sony has brighter shadows than the Canon Log 3. The R6 has a reduced ISO range when recording video, 100 to 25600 ISO, although the extended values still reach 204,800. On the A7 IV, the extended ISO goes up to 102,400. Like in photo mode, the A7 IV image is brighter when using the same exposure settings. I tried to even out the two images the best I could to make the footage easier to compare. The R6 shows more noise than the A7 IV despite the lower megapixel count, which is surprising. It becomes more apparent from ISO 6400, but the Canon also preserves colors better at the highest settings. Unlike the A7 IV, the R6 has a noise reduction option for movie recording. If you leave noise reduction off, the noise increases as expected. With a high setting, the image is much closer to the A7 IV, which makes me think that the Sony applies noise reduction automatically. The rolling shutter effect, meaning the distortion when moving quickly with the camera, is about the same on both cameras. It is visible when moving slowly and very invasive when panning quickly in full frame mode. With the APS-C crop, which is also called Super 35 on the A7, the distortion is less severe. The variable shutter setting on the A7 IV that can reduce or eliminate flickering with LED lights also works for video and can be very effective. The Sony has an advantage with long recording time because it doesn't have the 30-minute per clip limitation like the R6. Also, the A7 model has been designed to reduce overheating with the help of a heat dissipation structure inside the body, and in my test I was able to record without interruption for more than 2 hours. The R6 not only has a 30-minute limitation, but can overheat much more easily. In the same conditions, the warning icon appeared approximately 15 minutes after starting the second clip, so a total of 45 minutes so far. 10 minutes later, the camera shut down. After a 5-minute break, the R6 let me record another 20 minutes before shutting down once more. The test was performed with the auto power off temperature option set to high on the A7 IV and the standby low res setting, formerly overheat control, set to on for the R6. The A7 IV has various extra settings designed for video. Some are very simple yet useful, like the possibility of displaying a red frame on the LCD screen when recording. Another useful feature is called breathing compensation. When enabled, it eliminates the small change in angle of view that happens when focusing from the foreground to the background, a characteristic of many photography lenses. Note that the field of view is cropped a little and that not all lenses are compatible. You'll find a link to the Sony website with the full list in the description. On the R6, there is the possibility of changing the aperture in 1/8 steps rather than the standard 1/3 steps to make more precise adjustments. Face and eye detection also works for video recording. My test with a human subject showed that the two cameras perform in the same way. The A7 IV is slightly slower when the subject is close to the lens, whereas the R6 lost focus momentarily when she moved away from the camera. When she was wearing a hat, both products did an excellent job of keeping focus on the eye or go back to the eyes after she covered her face momentarily. The R6 didn't exhibit the same hesitation I found in the photo mode occasionally. IAF with animals and birds is also available for video and works really well, albeit with the same limitation described in part 1 of my comparison, like for example not being able to recognize all the species. In an extreme low light situation, both cameras are unable to follow the subject all the way, but the 7.4 refocuses faster at the end. With one extra light turned on in the kitchen, both cameras do better. Concerning the extra settings, both cameras allow you to control the sensitivity and speed of the autofocus to suit different situations. When set for the fastest performance, the R6 is slower than the Sony, whose focus change can be almost instantaneous. Another way to use these settings is to record slow and pleasant transition from one point to the other. In this case, both cameras allow you to find the right amount of speed, but the R6 has an abrupt beginning and ending, whereas the A7 IV accelerates gradually at the start and decelerates gradually at the finish, giving you a smoother result. If you want to focus manually, there is magnification and peaking on the two cameras, but I would like to talk about two other functions that I find really useful. On the A7 IV, there is Focus Map, a setting that overlays a graphic visualization of your depth of field. Cool colors show what is behind the focus point, and warm colors what is in front of it. The areas of the image when there is no color overlays show what is in focus, or more precisely what is within the depth of field. It takes some time to get used to it, and you may find the amount of vivid colors too invasive, but it works really well and with a great amount of precision, even when using a fast aperture. On the R6, you'll find my favorite minor focus assist ever, Focus Guide. It uses the phase detection points of the dual pixel CMOS AF and tells you how much to adjust and in which direction. Once you've done it, the icon becomes green. It is the most precise and easy to use function I ever tested on any cameras. Stabilisation is available with movie recording, and both cameras offer additional settings to improve the performance. With a static shot using an 85mm lens, the A7 IV does a better job, keeping the movements more contained in comparison to the R6. The latter fails to deliver a consistent performance. There are moments where it looks better than the Sony, but 3 seconds later it looks worse. You can activate electronic stabilization to improve the quality, which is called active on the Sony, digital IS on the Canon. But bear in mind that the field of view is cropped as a consequence. The A7 IV continues to offer better performance, although the advantage is reduced. The R6 has an extra step, digital IS enhanced, but the crop is more severe and the result doesn't improve a lot. When working with each camera using a 35mm lens, the footage looks much better on the R6 without electronic stabilization. The A7 IV is unusable with just IBIS, but the quality improves with the active mode, getting closer to the performance of the Canon. The results are still far from perfect, with random jerks that can ruin the shot. Digital IS Enhanced on the R6 doesn't make a lot of difference. There is another possibility with the A7 IV that involves the Sony Catalyst software. You leave steady shot off and stabilize the footage in post where the software uses the data of the camera's gyro sensor. For static shots, Catalyst doesn't make a relevant difference, but when walking, it gives you the best result out of all the options I just described. One thing to keep in mind is that Catalyst reduces sharpness on the image a little. If we talk about photography, it is more difficult to establish a clear winner between these two cameras. They both have strong points and a few weaknesses, as I show you in the first part of my comparison. With video, however, I think the A7 IV has the edge. Not only it delivers more latitude with HDR or log profiles, but it also has more settings, higher bit rates, and it can record for a longer time without overheating, and overheating remains one of the Canon's weakest points. The only real advantage for the R6 when it comes to movies is the possibility to record 4K 50 or 60p with a small sensor crop, whereas you need to accept a 1.5 times crop on the A7 model. Alright, that marks the end of my review and I hope you enjoyed it and I hope it was helpful for you. Remember that you can find the link to the first part of my comparison in the description. Thank you for watching. Don't hesitate to leave a comment as usual if you have any question and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.